Hello and welcome back to GamingBolt, and today we're going to be talking about who won, quote-unquote, E3 2018. E3 was a little strange this year. It wasn't great or bad. No, the one word that can be used to describe it better than any other is strange. There were in-depth gameplay reveals of games that have been announced for some time, but many of them didn't even reveal release dates. There was some major megaton announcements, but a large number of these were either trailers with no gameplay footage shown, or were little more than just title reveals. Some of the conferences were terrible, none of them were exceptional. In light of that, to talk about one particular company as if they won, quote-unquote, E3 doesn't make much sense, because even if one of them is the winner, they're the best of an average bunch, so their accomplishments are nothing to write home about anyway. It's like rewarding someone for using a number 2 pencil in an SAT test. That's not to say E3 was bad or boring. Overall, it was just unremarkable. However, we do have to decide on which conference was the best of the bunch, or at least which one was the least unremarkable, as the case may be. So let's take a brief look at each one of them one final time before speaking about the one that, well, won, quote-unquote, italicized, E3. Let's get the third-party publishers out of the way first. E3 week was kicked off with the EA press conference, aka EA Play, and there aren't enough words in the English language to describe just how pointless the entire thing seemed to be. They had next to no new stuff to show off, while the stuff they did show, they didn't really show. They talked about a few games, including Battlefield 5, FIFA 19, and Anthem, but that is, for the most part, all they did. Sure, there was some intermittent footage of Anthem, which looked decent enough, I guess, but didn't really blow anything out of the water, but even that was shown sparingly, with EA instead choosing to bring BioWare devs on stage to awkwardly talk about their game in a bizarrely ambiguous manner for over 10 minutes. Even if there was nothing major to announce and they didn't have any new gameplay to show, why were they even at E3? To waste everyone's time? It sure felt that way. The only notable stuff they showed was the EA Originals games. Unravel 2 in particular looked brilliant, plus it was a shadow drop, releasing as it was announced on stage. The other thing was the little snippets of gameplay of Anthem that we were able to catch, and even that could have been easily part of something completely unrelated to E3. Like Game Informer's cover story for the month of July, which, by the way, is exactly what Anthem is. Sure, compared to EA's E3 conference last year, which was essentially a cringe compilation of the highest order, this year's show had a much more organized feel to it. But if such are the standards EA has fallen to, then they are truly, pardon my French, in the deep shit. Square Enix, for whom it was very important to at least do a passable job on their return to the E3 center stage, fared much better than EA. They showed plenty of gameplay for 2 games, namely Shadow of the Tomb Raider and Just Cause 4, both which are coming out this year, by the way. Tomb Raider didn't look remarkable, but it looked solid enough, and we know enough about the series' core strengths by now to have judged from what we saw that it was at least shaping up to be a solid Tomb Raider game. At least that's what it looks like. Just Cause 4, on the other hand, looked really good. Again, it wasn't like it was Game of the Show material, but it looked good enough that it must have gotten a fairly large number of people pretty hyped, especially fans of the series. Other than that, Dragon Quest XI looked pretty good, while Square also announced 2 entirely new IPs, the Platinum-developed Babylon's Fall, which looked awesome, and something called The Quiet Man, which features a dead guy as the protagonist, or so I'm assuming. And that's all we know about those 2. Disappointingly enough, these 2 games received no gameplay footage, no release dates, though Babylon's Fall does have a release window of 2019, begging the question why at this rate they even had to be revealed in the first place. No one before the Square event even knew these games existed. No one would have been pissed at Square for not announcing these 2 games. I'd rather they'd held off on these reveals until they actually had something to show, besides just the games' names and weird live-action trailers, which is how The Quiet Man, whatever it is, was revealed. Beyond that, some of the other stuff Square Enix brought to their show had already been spoken of quite a lot in Microsoft's press event. The Awesome Adventures of Captain Spirit, a standalone Life is Strange episode that leads into Life is Strange 2, and Nier Automata's upcoming Xbox One release has a few examples. Or they were shown in even greater detail at the Sony event, aka Kingdom Hearts 3. So yes, Square Enix's press event was decent, but nothing more. It was also a little disappointing that the duo of Square Enix's Avengers project and Final Fantasy Remake were conspicuously missing from the proceedings. And then we come to Ubisoft. Oh, Ubisoft. Ubisoft's press event was much more uneven, with much higher highs and extremely lower lows. They kicked things off with a ridiculous dance number that seemed to go on forever, all to announce a new Just Dance game, and probably their commitment to the furry community. I mean, I have nothing against announcing yet another Just Dance game at E3. It is kind of tradition that Ubisoft starts its show off that way, but giving it the spotlight for a good chunk of your conference, also one that's right at the beginning of the show, is a little weird, to put it mildly. There was also an inordinate amount of time spent on Starlink Battle for Atlas, though it did involve a pretty cool moment which saw Nintendo legend Shigeru Miyamoto come on stage, which was baffling, to say the least. There was also a ridiculous live band performance for the reveal of Mario plus Rabbids Donkey Kong Adventure. What was even more annoying, though, was the fact that the footage seemed secondary to the on-stage performance, whereas really it should have been the other way around. Beyond that, there was a pretty cool-looking Beyond Good and Evil 2 trailer, followed by a brief bit of pre-alpha gameplay footage, which is all aces in my book. Gameplay footage is never a bad thing, and on that note, Ubisoft also showed some new trailers for The Division 2, and as trailers, they were pretty cool, but that's all they really showed. The extensive gameplay reveal had already come earlier during the Microsoft press event, so Ubisoft instead took the opportunity to announce some major and excellent new details on the game, including an overhaul of endgame content, as well as the addition of raids and free DLC for Year 1. There was a new Trials game and new content for Rainbow Six Siege and For Honor, but the best bit came right at the end when Ubisoft officially revealed Assassin's Creed Odyssey. What's even better is that it was a prolonged gameplay reveal, not just a trailer or a title card, and it looked amazing. Conversely, it's a little disappointing that after weeks, or some would say months, of intense speculation, the next Splinter Cell game was not announced by Ubisoft. So yeah, mixed bag there. Some bits of it were much more memorable than anything Square Enix or even EA showed, but the bits that were bad were pretty bad. And then there's Bethesda. On paper, Bethesda's conference was excellent. If you were to tell someone post facto about the stuff Bethesda revealed during their show, they'd probably lose their minds. They'd think it was the greatest press conference ever. Really though, it was good. It could have been great, but Bethesda fell into the same trap that EA did, and combined with uncharacteristically early releases for games, their conference was actually not nearly as good as it should or could have been. A Doom sequel was revealed, but they showed no gameplay. A new Wolfenstein game was announced, Wolfenstein Youngblood, but hey, it's primarily a co-op experience, and again, no gameplay. The long-rumored Starfield was finally announced, but once again with zero footage, as well as the baffling admission that it was going to be a next-gen game. Bethesda also pulled the rug out from everyone's feet and officially announced The Elder Scrolls 6, but all they did was show a title card. The game doesn't even have a full name yet. Also, bizarrely enough, they confirmed that the Elder Scrolls 6 release was beyond even Starfield, a game which itself is at least 2 or 3 years away from launch. Fallout 76 looked pretty great though. Bethesda spent a good 30 to 40 minutes speaking about the game, revealing loads of new details, showing plenty of gameplay footage, and all around just selling people on their vision of Fallout 76 pretty damn well. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of online experiences, but even I had to admit that their showing of the game was impressive. There's also the fact that Todd Howard oozes charisma and charm, and every second he was on stage, everyone's eyes were glued to him raptly. They also showed quite a lot of Rage 2, they actually kicked things off with it, and it looks pretty amazing. Oh, and shout out to Pete Hines for that amazing jab at Walmart Canada at the beginning. Kudos, Mr. Hines. So yeah, again, Bethesda's conference was decent enough in that it showed lots of gameplay for Fallout 76 and announced plenty of new games. But it was also a little disappointing because they showed no footage for many of these new games. While the Starfield and the Elder Scrolls 6 announcement felt less like actual planned announcements and more like insurance to appease fans in case they didn't take to the online-centric Fallout 76 too kindly. Because, let's face it, Bethesda has made it abundantly clear on a number of occasions that the Elder Scrolls 6 is a long, long way off from launch. Plus, it's not like in the absence of this announcement there would have been any doubt that there simply wasn't going to be an Elder Scrolls 6. So why announce games that are literally years away from release, especially when you're showing no gameplay or revealing nothing but the fact that yes, the game does indeed exist? What difference did these announcements even make? Effectively, none whatsoever. So now that the third-party publishers are out of the way, let's move on to the big three, the console giants. We'll kick things off with Nintendo, which was the very last E3 press event. Nintendo had announced pretty early on, a good few weeks prior to E3 in fact, that their focus during the show would be squarely on Super Smash Bros. For the Nintendo Switch, which we now know is called Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, much like what they did with Super Mario Odyssey last year, and The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild the year before that. So the fact that almost half an hour of that conference was just Masahiro Sakurai talking about the game in painstaking detail, from character changes to stage changes to the number of characters to everything else in between, was no surprise. It was actually a pretty satisfying dive into Smash, which looks excellent to no one's surprise. Nintendo also finally spoke about the Fire Emblem game that's coming to the Switch, which is called Fire Emblem Three Houses. They showed a trailer that included some gameplay, as well as some narrative elements. It looks great, but disappointingly enough, it's no longer going to be a 2018 game. It's instead slated for spring 2019. Also announced was a mech action game called Daemon X Machina from Armored Core series producer Kenichiro Tsukuda. Then there was Super Mario Party and an expansion pack for Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Other than that, there was little else of note in the rest of the conference. So really, is it even fair to compare Nintendo to any of the other conferences? Because essentially, it wasn't even a real conference, as much as a nearly 50-minute long show about Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, with sprinklings of a few other games in the beginning. For what it was supposed to be, which was a thorough and in-depth reveal of the next Smash game, Nintendo's show worked very well. But really, that's all that can be said about it. If I had to pick a winner among all the conferences at this year's E3, I'd have a pretty hard time deciding between the Microsoft and Sony events. Sony did some experimenting this year. They announced pretty early on what their E3 showing would be focusing on via the deep dives into 4 of their biggest upcoming exclusives, and they stuck to their schedule the way they said they would. Let's talk about the good stuff first. Ghost of Tsushima looks good with some of the most beautiful visuals we've ever seen in a game. Seriously, its visual palette hits you like a ton of bricks. The Last of Us Part 2 looks as ridiculously intense and technically marvelous as every single person in the world predicted it would. Spider-Man looks incredible too, and it's a good thing that its release is just 3 months away, because after a showing like that, I really didn't want to wait much longer to get my hands on the game. There were also a couple of surprising announcements that pretty much no one saw coming. For one, Capcom announced Resident Evil 2 Remake, which looks beautiful and amazing and is launching very soon, on January 25th of 2019. Also announced was Nioh 2. Shockingly enough, though again, much to my disappointment, no gameplay was shown. Meanwhile, New Game Plus was also confirmed for God of War, which is good news, obviously. And now, moving on to the stuff that wasn't so good. Death Stranding. That game has now officially moved past the point where it was cryptic but in a cool way. Now it's cryptic in a frustrating way. We've seen 3 trailers of the game since its announcement 2 years ago, and now was the perfect time to finally show us properly just what the hell this game was all about. Hideo Kojima, being Hideo Kojima, instead decided that it would be better to wait a little bit more. There's a point you should stop, and Kojima has moved well past that point now. Somehow he managed to show us 10 minutes of Death Stranding while actually showing us nothing at all. After 4 meaty trailers, if this were any other game, you'd have a pretty good idea of what it was going to be. Death Stranding though, still no frickin' clue. And you know what? It's not endearing anymore. It's actually annoying. It's also a pretty big bummer that Sony didn't mention even a broad release window for Death Stranding, or Ghost of Tsushima, or The Last of Us Part 2. Not even a plain and simple 2019. And really, it's because of these few but significant issues that Sony's conference ended up being less than spectacular, solid and engaging, but unremarkable. Much like all of E3 2018 actually, and it's because of this too that I have to look at Microsoft as the winner of E3 2018, at least in my estimation. Microsoft's E3 presser was actually one of the best they've had in years, and sure, that's not saying a lot considering that their E3 events this generation have been largely forgettable at best and downright disastrous at worst. But this year, Microsoft had a really solid showing. Not spectacular, mind you, but confident and well structured enough that it emerges as the clear winner. 50 games were shown off at their press event, including the likes of The Division 2, Life is Strange, The Awesome Adventures of Captain Spirit, and Xbox One release date of Nier Automata, From Software's Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, which looks spectacular by the way, and most notably, the long-awaited Devil May Cry 5. There was a slew of third-party games at their showing, but in a very uncharacteristic fashion. Microsoft also focused a fair bit on first-party, and most of their focus seems to be on building for the future rather than salvaging the present. In the immediate future, we've got Forza Horizon 4 coming up, but when you look at what's to come from Microsoft beyond that, you can't help but be impressed and feel like they might just be learning their lessons. Gears 5, Gears Tactics, and Halo Infinite are all in the pipeline, and they all seem to be promising bright new futures for their respective franchises. Beyond that, Microsoft really seems to be putting all its energies into strengthening its first-party lineup. They announced the acquisition of 5 new studios, with one of them being a brand new one made from scratch, and 2, in more notable news, being Playground Games and, of all things, Ninja Theory. That really came out of nowhere, and indeed, it looks like Microsoft are looking to and building for the future. If this E3 was any indication, they seem to know what they're doing for the foreseeable future. That'll be it for this video. If you like what we're doing, please go ahead and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.